We begin with an acknowledgement of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the waters of this harbour and the land around us. In paying my respects to the Gadigal elders present and past, I'd like to pause and gather into all our minds part of the description of elders that the City of Sydney gives in its Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander protocols. These say, "The term elder is used to describe people who have knowledge, wisdom and respect of the local community. Elders are charged with the responsibility of providing guidance to the community on cultural matters. An elder is not necessarily an older person, but must be recognised as a cultural knowledge keeper. It is the elders who hold the history and pass on the laws that govern the community. The protocols don't say so, but in traditional Aboriginal communities, cultural knowledge is carried and transmitted in songs, dances, paintings, sculptures, and other graphic and ceremonial arts. Whatever our cultural affiliations, it's a blessing to know a good elder, which is who my friend Tom Bass was to me, and maybe you too. Tom touched thousands, maybe millions of people through his life work of 6 decades as a public sculptor and teacher of sculpture. No artist has done more to shape the public face of art in Australia than Tom Bass, John MacDonald, art critic for the Sydney Morning Herald, wrote in 2006 during Sydney Celebrates the Sculpture of Tom Bass, the retrospective exhibition in the Opera House. At Tom's funeral in February 2010, Tim Bass said that his father's life work was a catalyst for something good in our Australian ethos. My talk tonight is a personal tribute to Tom, and I hope you'll also accept it as a kind of homage from my city of Canberra, for which Tom created our first and best loved public artwork, the 50-year-old sculpture of Ethos, Spirit of the Community. We can't have the original Ethos here tonight because she's busy in Canberra, but I've brought some photos of her and the head of Ethos that Tom made in 2009, his 93rd year, will preside over proceedings. It's her there. In Ethos, as in all his work, Tom attended to the conserving and creative aspects of his work as a community guide on cultural matters. He kept and transmitted cultural knowledge in a lineage of teaching artists that he traced through his teacher Dattilo Rubo to the Italian Renaissance. And he also worked very hard as a member of another noble, if a bit raggedy, and mostly forgotten, very ancient European lineage of artists. These are the visionary seers and prophets who dreamed something new to meet the spiritual needs of a people in the predicaments of a particular place and time. Our need of these artists here and now is very great. The forms they produce may shape-shift with changes in the culture, but we depend upon these artists to hear and symbolically represent what's really going on under the hubbub of the market and what the government and media are saying. They're also the ones who find a way to express what is trying to come into being. C.G. Jung was thinking of them when he wrote that the artist is constantly at work educating the spirit of the age, conjuring up the forms in which the age is most lacking. In this time of global crisis, as well perhaps as opportunity, it's worth pondering Jung's statement that art represents a process of self-regulation in the life of nations and epochs. Later, Johanna and I will introduce you to another old man who I think Tom was related to 2,500 years down the European branch of that lineage. For those of you who didn't know Tom, here's an image of him from 1998. An elder, aged 82, with something passionate on his mind. And here's a sneak preview of the other old man. His name is Aeschylus. He was an artist too, better known for his plays than his portrait, though maybe you can see in a certain intensity of gaze that he and Tom were related in more ways than the trim of their beards. Both these wise old men were good company and superb storytellers, conversationalists who enjoyed red wine and had a fervent curiosity about the nature of life and the potential of everything that changed and developed in their own psyches and communities. Both had strong dreams and occasional visions. They knew that myths are pieces of life, that they tell the laws that govern what happened. Though one died 2 years ago and one nearly 2,500 years ago, they were both very concerned that people were out of touch with the laws of nature. In their own ways and with a lot of sorrow, they observed that people were raising the laws of cities above the laws of nature. And each of these elders devoted himself to doing what he could in his own community through his art to turn back the catastrophes that would result from this attitude, this hubris. This brings us to a small word from Aeschylus's vocabulary that I'd like to introduce you to if you haven't met it yet. Telos. Telos means purpose, the goal, the condition of maturity, of full development. I'm trying to resuscitate this word because it tells us the most significant thing about people, which is who we can be. The telos is what the physicist David Bohm called the implicate order in the cosmos and ourselves that unfurls itself when the environment permits. The telos is the bright flower in a little brown bulb, the butterfly in a fat cocoon. It is the goal or purpose, often the gift, that draws people along towards the fulfillment of their potential, and it is synonymous with the good. Telos can be regarded as the destiny of an individual or community spirit, in effect, its destination. Aristotle is another of the Greek gentlemen in the Elders Club Tom belongs to. He uses the word telos in his book on the nature of politics and cities when he says that we know a thing by what it has in it to become. Our psychological telos is the energetic force in Jung's observations about individuation, the lifelong process through which we become fully ourselves. Through temperament and faith, Tom Bass was devoted to the telos in himself, in people he was close to, and in the many Australian communities to which he was deeply connected. That he was motivated, even compelled by his telos from the beginning of his work life, is clear in this passage from his book, Totemic. He said, "This was the key to who I am. It's also a key to how he conceived ethos."
When I finished art school after the Second World War and was about to embark on my career as a sculptor, I really thought about what sort of sculptor I should be. I looked at the sculpture of all ages and periods, and I tried to find the essential thing about sculpture that made it important in every period. I decided it was this: sculpture is the most social of the arts. It's something in the open air associated with the great buildings that have a kind of symbolic significance for communities or with religion. Every phase of it that I looked at, I found the sculptor making a significant symbol or totem for the community. The sculptor has always been the seer or spokesperson for the community. I decided that was the kind of sculptor I would become.
By 1959, Tom had made several major sculptures for universities, churches, and corporations. These were what he called totemic works, which meant for him that their purpose was to remind people, communities, and societies of the things that are most important to them. So Tom was a fantastic choice by the National Capital Development Commission for the sculptor to represent the spirit of the community that the fledgling city-state of Canberra, ACT, had it in it to become. But it can be an incredibly difficult job getting to hear what's brewing beneath a city, especially a new one that was not very much more than a plan for this place of natural beauty and a clutch of ideals about an Australian expression of civilised wisdom, justice and democracy. In 1959, the total population of the bush capital was about 50,000 people, very few of whom were born in Canberra. It was already an interesting place from a multicultural point of view, with many migrants moving there from the Snowy Mountains scheme to help build the city. But the Molonglo River hadn't been dammed, so there was no Lake Burley-Griffin, little suburban development. The Blue Moon Milk Bar in Civic was the only cafe in town. Sheep from a local farm often wandered into the grounds of Parliament House. Development was being driven along at a cracking pace by Prime Minister Menzies after earlier falterings that resulted from the Great Depression and 2 world wars. The Canberra Chamber of Commerce, a keen, if rather lean force in this government town, became involved with the NCDC in funding the sculpture project. Tom was always more intent on public inspiration than material aspiration, and it has to be said that he was not stimulated by the part of his brief for the sculpture that urged him to focus on what was described as the restless, virile, energetic movement of free enterprise. His imagination refused to follow NCDC and the Chamber into the wild hyperbole of what the brief described as the restless and virile private sector of Canberra in 1959.
Canberra was not really a city. It was a synthetic city with a synthetic community. These people had not come together out of the dynamic that usually creates a city. They'd been sent there virtually against their wills.
So, how did Ethos make herself visible? Much later, Tom thought that perhaps she'd really begun in the 1930s when he was a very young man, attending soirees at the Castle Craig home of Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Marnie Griffin. Tom found Marion particularly inspiring, and he certainly caught the hope that Walter had expressed in 1913, that Canberra would become a city that is not like any other in the world, a city that meets my ideal of the city of the future. Tom wanted to join the big ideas and his own confidence in the power of community into a great symbolic work of art. Every day he went to his desk and waited for the right idea to come. As weeks, then months rolled on, he fell into a kind of agony. He thought the sculpture would be abstract, but his pen couldn't draw anything that brought the feeling of community spirit and the rational ideas in the city plan together. He produced what he described as a vast pile of useless drawings. Arthur Shakespeare, founder of the Canberra Times and a doyen of the Chamber of Commerce, described to Tom in minute detail the thing he should do. Sculpt a figure of a man laying bricks to represent the building of Canberra. Other people had other opinions, but nothing released Tom from the exacting, awful reality that he had to find the answer in himself. On Friday, 19 February 1960, Grenfell Ruddock, chair of the NCDC Coordination Committee in Canberra, wrote in his diary about Prime Minister Menzies' visit to the NCDC that day. Apparently the PM was in a jovial mood. Mr. Ruddock noted that the PM has no thoughts of Parliament House being built in his day. He is against competitions as a means of selecting architects. He is worried about the expenditure on the lakes. He wants to see the piece of sculpture. Tom told me the other side of the story. When the Prime Minister got someone to ring up to ask where the sculpture was, he had nothing to report. His anguish was nearly unbearable. Finally, desperately, he went to his friend, Father Bede, the Franciscan abbot at the Novitiate House in Campbelltown. Tom asked whether the monks might pray for a solution to the problem. The good friar agreed. And the very next morning, Tom traced the first line of a woman's body. That after inspiration came a lot of perspiration, including of a diplomatic kind, is confirmed in file notes and other records that Margot and Paul Hendy have been bringing to light. The committee were happy with the figure Tom drew for them, but she was originally designed to be releasing a dove from her hands, which the National Capital Planning Committee vetoed on the basis that the dove was too reminiscent of Picasso. No drawing, but here's a subsequent drawing with the ACT coat of arms. Finally, Tom drew the woman reaching to the sun, and then he was freed into making the large copper figure. There's a big story about the making process in the months before this photo was taken. I'm not really competent to talk about that, though it's quite proper to note that having dreamed and prayed her up, Tom then pioneered the development of techniques and technologies in order to body her forth. These included the use of electrolytic copper depositing for large sculptural works, and the intricate as well as muscular process of constructing the sculpture from a large number of pieces and welding them together. So there she was, complete in form. But then the fretting returned, this time about the work's name. Tom thought the spirit of Canberra sounded too much like a train. But nothing else occurred until one day in the workshop, ethos, an unfamiliar word, fell into his mind. If you look up ethos in the Macquarie Dictionary, you'll find that it comes into English from the Greek, and our word ethics also comes from ethos. Its sociological meaning in Australian English is the fundamental spiritual characteristics of a culture. The spirit of community, exactly that. The way these wise things of artistic intuition and imagination occur is always a mystery. Rationality can't account for them, though they are central in any psychology that includes the telos of the creative human spirit. The fact is that a quality and an image like ethos is most likely to emerge in someone who has the capacities and generative balance of all true elders. That is, of holding the tension in a community between love and power, relationship and rationality, and of carrying the history at the same time as being able to provide guidance for the future. Other emergent qualities related to ethos and an ethical sensibility that cannot be ordered into existence, even by prime ministers, chambers of commerce, and media proprietors, include wisdom, compassion, belonging, peaceful living, goodness, hope, creative living and play, psychological and cultural maturity, the making of meaning and meaningful symbols. You can see them all in ethos. I think it took Tom so long to see the beautiful face, body, and meaning of ethos because her precise apprehension required his passage through that disciplined period of ethical and spiritual preparation in which he went out and met many of the ordinary people of Canberra, curious, engaging, listening to their interests, longing, attachments, in that marvellous way Tom had. And then he showed up at his desk for month after month and went home, not kidding himself, knowing the Spirit hadn't appeared, that he wasn't ready yet. Then recognising her face and form when they did come. In his speech at the unveiling, Tom had this to say.
The commissioning of ethos is highly significant. For too long in Australia, communities, with very few exceptions, have not been prepared to consider anything more in the line of civic art than the local war memorial or stone cairn with a brass plate marking a historic place. Now, for the people of our young national capital, comes the initiative for a piece of civic art to express something more complex. There is, I've found, a very strong and very special community spirit emerging in Canberra. Nature made Canberra a beautiful place, but even apart from its visible beauty, there are emerging in Canberra attractive and interesting human attitudes which make the city especially exciting. The people of Canberra are identifying themselves with their city, not in any selfish, self-satisfied, parochial sense, but with a sense of belonging to a growing metropolis. Already Australia's largest inland city and the centre of a local region. With Ethos, I've tried to provide a vocal point for the affection the people of Canberra feel for their city. Ethos meets the basic requirements for my conception of what civic art in Australia should try to achieve. Both the artist and the society can benefit from the development of civic arts which aim to serve the community, to enrich the imagination, to clarify and enlarge the sensibilities and the consciousness of the people. Our civic art, I believe, should attempt to attain dignity, freshness, and conviction to become a genuine expression of the life of the people.
So let's look more closely at Ethos. Since 1961, she's stood with quiet grace in Civic Square. She's located outside the front entrance of the ACT Legislative Assembly, and as the city changes around her, she continues to embody something of Walter Burley Griffin's hope that Civic Square would become the living heart of Canberra. Ethos is about 6 metres tall, humanly proportioned, and with a facial expression that is serious yet understanding and soft. In 1961, Tom said he wanted the love Canberra people have for their city to be identified with her. He envisaged the sculpture as beauty arising from and through a plan, in this case, beauty represented by the national capital arriving from and through a planned city. The substantial ACT Heritage Register citation for Ethos notes that the form of the work is highly symbolic. In many ways, it's a sculptural analogue and personification of Walter Burley Griffin's plan for the ideal city. The surface of the saucer bears a relief map of Canberra, including the lake that would later fill the space between the Civic Centre and the Parliamentary Triangle. The posture and raised wings suggest a civilising, spiritual character, and the wide hips are generative. The figure is robed in a fabric richly embossed with symbols of ancient civilizations and images of the local citizenry. In reaching to the sun, Ethos points to the rational as well as relational basis of governance. The Heritage Citation quotes Tom's speech at the time of unveiling. The bursting sun she holds aloft is symbolic of culture and enlightenment, which the presence of Canberra's universities, its research organisations and the diplomatic corps and so on give to the city. Even her dancing shadow is beautiful. You can tell that Ethos has meant much to the Canberrans. Here are a few of the ways in which this has been expressed. Our friend Judy Klingen, a composer and wonderful musician who sings with the Chorus of Women, produced this in 1971 for a choral festival. The next photo features Ethos on this float from the 60s. You can see her there with her arms behind her back having a rest. There is a lodge in Canberra, a Masonic lodge, which has taken the name of Ethos. In 2001, there was a multicultural festival that was masterminded by a man called David Branson. And Tom was really excited to learn about the plans for this a big pageant that was to take place during the festival. And the organisers of the festival decided that they would wrap Ethos in the way that Christo does. And Tom was also very excited about that. At the same time as this was going on, Tom came and he spoke to the Canberra Jung Society. Numerous artists came together and they all talked about the soul of the city. The Canberra Museum and Gallery has taken Ethos into its logo, and you can see her there at the corner of the building reaching up to the sun with a kind of wilder hairdo than Tom gave her. And just a month or so ago, I found at the Hellenic Club in Canberra that the Ethos band was performing. My final stories are about some of the ways that Ethos has been continuing to reveal her telos to us in Canberra. Over the last 13 or so years, I've written several papers about Ethos, and there's perhaps another story to tell sometime about the moving responses I've witnessed to this special sculpture. These include within the wonderful Chorus of Women, from which Johanna and also Meg, who direct our music, are with us tonight. We've been much inspired by both Tom and Ethos. 7 years ago, when Tom was 89, I was involved with the chorus in planning for a festival of peace that was to be held in the ACT Legislative Assembly with sponsorship from all three MLAs from all three political parties. The purpose was to celebrate the 95th anniversary of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. This, incidentally, is the organisation to which Picasso donated his famous drawing of the dove in order to encourage their worldwide work. The chorus wanted to do something around Ethos in the festival, and I thought I'd try to write a song. So I visited Ethos and listened for her voice. Then suddenly I had a really much better idea. I went home and I phoned Tom and asked whether he thought Ethos might have something to say to the Canberra community after all the years of standing there quietly. We'll see, he said, in his resonant, warm voice. And a few days later, he rang me in a great state of excitement. He'd woken from a dream at 4:30 with Ethos talking to him. So he got out of bed and he wrote down what she said. Listen.
I am Ethos. Though I do not speak with words, I speak to you in other ways. I say to you that I am the spirit of this place and its people. I am the original spirit and the spirit of now. I rise from the earth and reach for the sun. I bring together the old and new. In me there is no violence or war, only peace and reconciliation. I am the love, peace, and beauty of this place. I give you these things every day and always.
We read this during a ceremony involving girls and women of all ages. And next time you're in Canberra and visit Ethos, you can read the poem because Tom engraved it in a plaque that's been set in the pavers beside the sculpture. 14 months ago, Tom made another statement about Ethos.
As the creator of the sculpture Ethos, it was my hope that she would inspire the people with the value and importance of community. I express this through her brocaded government, the earth she stands on, and the sun that enlightens it.
At the time Tom wrote this, a chorus of women was planning to stage a season of my mythic story song about relations between people and earth in the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House, with a cast of 80 intrepid citizens. The Gifts of the Furies, it's called, and in it, Ethos takes the role played by the civilized, wise divinity Athena in the 3 dramas of the Oresteia by Aeschylus, on which I based the work. I checked with Tom throughout the process of bringing Ethos to life. You can hear quite a lot in other parts of his statement of support about his original vision of what Ethos would become in the Canberra community. He said about the Gifts of the Furies,
Ethos takes full possession of her role as the spirit of the community. She expresses the yearnings of the time in which peace and reconciliation are central. She also enacts her role as the intermediary between the forces of earth and heaven. With climate change being the crisis of our times, Ethos's actions are those of a loving and wise guide.
A chorus of women continues to make Ethos a centre point of ceremonies like the one in Civic Square we organised at the time of the war between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006. This was for people to gather around Ethos, to break bread together, share their grief and sing. Sometimes we put flowers at her feet. Ethos is a guiding image in civic activities that include our series of Canberra Conversations for dialogues and artistic input on matters of community significance. During the National Library's 40th birthday celebrations in 2008, there was a screening of the 1968 film about Tom's creation of the 35-metre lintel sculpture at the library, together with a public conversation with Tom. For this, I set the Ethos Speaks poem to music in a song. One of the most wonderful moments in my life was when we sang it to Tom as a surprise. We've been honoured to have a loan of the head of Ethos at various performances at the Furies, at Bass Sculpture Studio School and also in Canberra. Here are images of her and Tom before she was cast in bronze. For the 50th birthday of Big Ethos on 15th of December last year, the chorus arranged a celebration sponsored by the Chief Minister and MLAs from all the parties in the Legislative Assembly. A wide range of community leaders and groups met together with Tom's family and friends, and we all trod the meditative path of a labyrinth around the sculpture, and then everyone joined in the community singing of I Am Ethos as an anthem for the city. My final story comes from the time, a few months after Tom died, when I gave a paper called Looking at Ethos at the inaugural conference on wisdom and management in the College of Business and Economics at the ANU. As I was writing that paper, a sweet mystery revealed itself. When you go to Canberra and look at Ethos and the plaque beside her, you'll see that Tom did not give his name as the author of the poem. Just before this photograph of Tom with the then ACT Chief Minister John Stanhope, Tom, Margot and I were in a meeting with Mr Stanhope and some senior Canberra arts people at which the ACT government agreed to pay for the plaster model of the plaque to be cast in bronze. The Chief Minister's arts advisor said, "You haven't signed the poem, Tom." And in reply, Tom said,
I did not write the poem, Ethos is the author.
The delicate, respectful silence in the Chief Minister's office that followed his statement is now cemented into the pavers of Civic Square, along with a hopeful telos that also lived in Tom's comment to me not long before he died. This was that he was very glad that Ethos would still be there when he was gone. And that sweet mystery it is that although dear, wise Tom Bass has passed away from us, Ethos is still here, and she could speak or even sing to you too.